have enough. Okay.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, great to meet you over Zoom. I'm actually
Yeah.
super excited about this. But for anyone, first of all, it's just for me, for my curiosity, selfish curiosity. We'll share it. And if some other people get something out of it, awesome. Um, so I've followed you on Facebook for years, not in depth, but oh, that's kind of interesting. See things occasionally. And and so I'm really fascinated with your story. Um, I like puzzles. And I view people as puzzles. Does that make sense? And your puzzle is particularly interesting. Does that make sense? I'm like, oh, this is like, I
You're
want to
deep
know the
into it,
details. I want to know the details. So for everyone watching, we're gonna talk today about um, a bit about narcissism, like fixing it, recovering from it. Like, what do you do in these situations?
right?
I will say, here's like as I was driving over here, have you ever heard Bill Johnson's sermon on wisdom's tension?
It doesn't ring a bell, but I've listened to lots and lots of Bills. So
It was, it's like I think there's one of these Psalms or Proverbs that says, "Don't rebuke a fool," and then four verses later it goes, "Rebuke the fool," and you're like, "Wait, don't we do it?
mm,
Don't we do it?" Right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
so I view this, sometimes people like, okay, don't engage the narcissist, but we have to like restore people. Like, okay, well, which one is it? Does that make sense?
yeah, yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah.
And I've had, I don't know if I do coaching for people. I would a little outside the box. People will call it. I describe it as quantum physics meets Christian inner healing. And like
Interesting.
so, half the people in church think I'm super cool, and the other half think I might be practicing witchcraft. But but I
Yeah.
deal with a lot of women who've had narcissistic husbands, right?
Yeah.
And it's like I'm cautious to balance the okay, you need to get out of that
Mhm.
versus stay and sacrifice your whole family because narcissists can be recovered. It's like, well, which one are
Right.
you talking about here? That makes sense. So
Yeah.
tell a bit of your story. First, for people who don't know you, tell us a bit about I know you're in ministry, like at the height of your ministry, how large was it? Because I know you had a school, you had a lot of stuff going on, a lot of influence.
Yes. Okay. So, and I'd love to have you introduce yourself as well. So when I share this with my audience, they would know you a little bit as well. But I'll
Sure.
start. So, um, grew up in Rochester, New York. I'm 40 years old now. We live in South Carolina now. And early 20s, I went on a trip with Randy Clark to Brazil.
Mhm.
Spent about a month down there, went to four different cities, huge crusades, incredible miracles, like life altering stuff that you can't get out of your head. And from there, I was working construction. I had a roofing company, and I would leave my guys in charge of working on a project about a week a month, and I'd go and volunteer for Randy Clark. And so
Mhm.
I was going out and back for a couple years of volunteering, and then he hired my wife and I to come on staff for him. So in 2007, we moved down to Pennsylvania. We were there for 3 years working on staff. Around 2009, 2010, my first book came out, which recounted some of the story of what I saw in Brazil, some of my
Yeah.
personal experience. That was my first book. I was invited to go on Sid Roth. I had never heard of Sid Roth, and it blew up, and the book went just best selling, gangbusters,
What was
and
the book called?
that one was The School of the Seers.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard of that book. I haven't read it,
That
but
was
yes.
that was the first one, and it was around the same time that James Gall had put out his book, The Seer. There was a lot of books coming out on the topic at the time, but I really covered it from the angle of what is the gift of discerning of spirits. And
Mm.
so I dug into that. And that first book took me about 7 years to write. And so long process. I remember I remember thinking, "Oh, I'm so glad I'm done. I don't have to write anymore." And then I got ordained by Randy Clark, and Patricia King was there, and she prophesied over me that you're being ordained today as an author, and that books are going to just
Mm.
flow out of you. And so from then forward, I actually started putting out a book every year. Some years, two books a year. Writing them over the next 10 years or so. And so I was pumping them out. So at this point, when my next book comes out this summer, it will be the 15th book. So there's all different topics, but they're mostly biblical uh, theology concepts about covenant or eschatology or the supernatural. Those have really been my focus. And then in 2013, I started the Welton Academy Supernatural Bible School. And at first, there really wasn't very many online courses. Nowadays, I mean, e-courses are everywhere, and everybody's got an e-course, everybody's got a phone app, all of that. But 10 years ago, it was kind of cutting edge. So there was you could go to Bethel in person and attend the supernatural ministry school, or the niche that we were aiming for was at home learning and a combination of supernatural and Bible school together. So, more of a Bible education from a supernatural perspective.
Yeah.
So really went after that for 5 years. I think the school was 5 years from 2013 to 2018. And over the course of the 5 years, we had 2,600 students go through the school. Um, at one point, had about 12 staff members, um, traveling around the world, speaking 35 different countries. I took teams on archaeological tours to Greece, Italy, uh, Turkey, Egypt, Israel, Jordan, so all around the Mediterranean. So very, rounded out, did a lot of things. So speaking, touring, uh, teaching on the school, writing books, and then 2018, everything comes to a crashing halt. And at that point, I'd been married 14 years, still married, thankfully, but married 14 years at that point. And um, my wife and I, we had had lots of conflict over the years, but never any labels. We'd never spent a lot of time in counseling. We had had
Yeah.
maybe a little bit of counseling here and there, but 2018 we hit this wall, and we'll get into that. But let's pause for a moment here, and I'd like to hear a little bit of your background, your story as well, for my
Yeah,
listeners.
so I'm in I'm an emotion code and body code practitioner, but I do it from a little bit more of a Christian perspective. It's kind of like a little bit of woo-woo stuff that sometimes Christians are a little nervous about, and they're like, "Oh, well, this guy seems like a Christian. I'll do it with him." Um, you mentioned I listened to your kind of story, and you mentioned David Hawkins. Were you referring to the power versus force map of consciousness guy
No,
or
uh,
different guy? Okay,
I, I'm aware of both,
yeah.
but no. When let's see. Well, so when 2018 happened, if I back up, 2017, I have a Zoom call with my staff, and they start to share with me some concerns. Hey, you seem like you're burnt out. The way you're emotionally leaning on people, the way that you're you're not taking care of yourself, you're not taking care of your needs, and we're concerned about you. Okay, I hear you. I'll take a look at it. Kind of minimized what they were saying. Didn't really take it in. Didn't share it with my wife. Didn't share it with anybody else, and just kind of brushed it aside. So that was the end of 2017. They brought it up several more times throughout 2018, and over the course of 2018, I started heading down this road of an emotional affair with one of my staff members. And so when the late summer 2018, probably July, August, Danny Silk has connected with myself and our staff, and he's hearing things from them. And I said, well, just investigate it, talk to them and figure out what the story is, because I don't understand what they're complaining about. I don't understand what the issue is. And
You didn't
so
think there was a problem.
I thought there was a problem, and I thought there was a lot of misunderstanding. And so I felt like, you're coming up with stuff, but maybe Danny can help sort it out. So he starts digging into it and finds, no, there's a real problem here, and Jonathan is completely blind and doesn't see it at all. And in the process, it gets to a certain point where he says, okay, Jonathan, you need to step down and take some time off and work on stuff. And it seems very, even my staff is saying, we'll keep the school going. We believe in Better Covenant. We believe in what you're doing. We believe in this ministry. We want to see it still succeed and thrive. Like, nobody is out to, crucify Jonathan at this point.
Yeah.
And
What
so it was
what
very,
what what was he seeing where he was like, ding ding ding? Okay.
yeah, yeah. So I wasn't privy to those conversations, but the little bit of what I could understand would be, at the time, would be control, manipulation, pressure, emotional pressure, classic narcissism stuff. Now he wasn't using that label. He's not a professional counselor, but he, has oh, what is his thing? He was working with, in the past, he was working with men in domestic abuse situations, so he
Yeah.
had seen, these traits, these patterns before. And so he's having these conversations. Everybody's like, all right, let's have Jonathan go do what he needs to do to take care of himself, and then we'll walk out of restoration. So everybody seems real happy about that. But then I kept hiding stuff. And so when some of that came to the surface, like one of them was the girl that I was over connecting with, that you need to stop communicating with her, and I still was. And
Mm,
so since I was hiding that and that came to the light, everything blew up, and people were then kind of turned more from we want your best, to now we're afraid, we're much more hesitant to work with you. And so there was the situation changed a little bit. And so, well, not a little bit, the attitude changed a lot, but the situation changed even more. So from there, it was, now, since Jonathan's not, to put it in the words of Danny, so it would be, in a normal situation that he walks restoration out with somebody, at the point that things are brought to the light, they're repentant. And he was saying, I don't see repentant in you. And so this is concerning, and we need to literally expose this at a different level. So that's where he wrote a
yeah.
letter and sent it out
So,
to the
so
network.
here's a question for you.
Yeah, yeah,
Like, I'm sure you said, I'm sorry. Right.
sure.
So what are we looking for here to like for genuine repentance that he didn't see? Does that make sense? Like, oh, you would say you're sorry, but we're not seeing what?
Yeah, I think I asked that question for about 3 years from
Yeah.
Danny, and trying to figure that out myself. Even I know he makes it clear, for him, it's not about confession or apologies, but it's it's an actual change of behavior. And I think that the difference there is people are looking for what change, which behavior needs to change. And I think that's probably the bigger conversation that we'll start into in a little bit of narcissism and what actually needs to change. Um, because I think a lot of the beginning of the process where when everything he sent out his letter. So this was September 2018. He sent out a letter saying Jonathan is not repentant. He is still toxic and dangerous. Everything is shut down, and we'll see what happens down the road, basically. And so that was just this explosive thing, and it was far beyond anything Danny had ever done too. I had other leaders at Bethel call me up and say, "Is this real? Because this seems way beyond anything Danny would do." And I said, "No,
Yeah.
it's real." Most people didn't believe the letter was real at the beginning. Um,
And so
so
the accusations was you just weren't um, safe for people to be around emotionally, or I mean,
yeah,
because
manipulative.
I'll take a
Yeah,
step back. So one reason I find this conversation very interesting is because in the past 3 months I've had to deal with two narcissistic people in business. Okay,
yeah,
and when I say narcissistic people, one of my business partners, I make very good living in network marketing, and you deal with like upline, whatever, all that stuff. Well, one of my upline, when we say narcissist, it turned out every single thing that ever came out of his mouth was a lie, and he was able to convince people, women in his organization, to come on Zoom because he was a chiropractor, lie, and to undress so he could help them with their back problems. Like so, so say boom, that level of oh my God, like this guy is like serious predator level, and he's not doing anything wrong. Like, so that's like and recently another man came in, a new business partner, but someone else told me that guy's not a good guy. And there's like a whole WhatsApp group dedicated to like a dozen women detailing what he's done to them and how they have to be in therapy and da 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 da. Da. And again, that guy also, when I heard little things about him, I go, I've been hearing some things because I wanted to kind of know, is he's like, yeah, I screwed up a bit and I'm sorry. But there wasn't anything like that. There was like, no, I don't know. He said, she says, and there's the truth. And like, I'm like, oh. So in both those situations, I was like, him was called like a blitzkrieg level. Like, okay, we have this arranged that they're going to be terminated from the company and they're going to be removed from all the groups and we're going to block them just like boom. Because I was like, I'm not even going to engage with these people at all because they don't think anything's wrong and they're dangerous to people.
yeah,
So um, you weren't that yet at the same time, you know, uh, so I've heard your story a bit on just like being controlling and things like this in this inappropriate emotional relationship with somebody.
yeah,
Um, and is that basically what was going on? And you're like, I'm not doing anything wrong.
yeah. I was unable to see what the issues were, so I'm basically clueless at that
Yeah.
point. Part of it, one of the things that helped me, have you ever read a book called No More Mr. Nice Guy by Dr. Robert Glover? No?
Uh-uh.
Very, very helpful book because he takes out the term narcissism and basically helps you see all the traits and the behaviors, and he labels it, you're being a nice guy. And he calls it the nice guy syndrome. Because most narcissistic men, especially in the church, think that they're really nice guys. And I'm helping people, I'm serving people, I'm self-sacrificing, I'm giving, I don't understand why these people are upset at me. I do all this stuff. And essentially put myself last and try to people please and get approval from everybody.
Yeah,
And it's especially in Christian circles, the covert narcissism is different than what we imagine. When we think narcissism, generally we're thinking huge personality, massive ego, super arrogant, super obnoxious personality that just bothers everybody. It's the reason people don't like Donald Trump. Even though, whether you like or dislike his choices of policy, his personality grades on people because of that big obnoxious,
sure.
thing. And that's what we normally think of as a narcissist. So for me, it fell more under that category where I can't even see it. Like I think I'm this great, nice guy. I don't know why people are upset at me and thinking this and that. And I'm not seeing my lies as lies because to me they're true. I'm not seeing
Hmm.
my manipulation as manipulation. I'm just communicating my heart. And I think I'm being vulnerable because I'm coming from what I think is my truth and reality.
Yeah.
So total blind spot to how zero empathy and how I'm affecting other people, how they're experiencing me, how they're looking at reality going, that's not what we see.
So how
So
were people experiencing you? Does that make sense? It's like what in what way were people feeling damaged from having been with you? And I will say one thing is like most people in that situation uh are over the top smart. You
yeah,
know, and I think you could probably go, yeah, I have higher than average intelligence. I've read all these books behind me. Right. So
right,
it's like you can outmaneuver people, like you're like,
right.
see, I proved to you I'm right. And they're like, you know,
Yes. Yes. And I think that was what took so long even for my wife to wake up to it because she's like the fish in the water and she's able to see my version of reality so much more than the other people. So she's more at my defense at that time and doesn't see it the way that they're experiencing it. And I think even for them there was a progression because in 2018 there was much more of a, let's say like the kid gloves of, a light approach to Jonathan. And then in 2020, several of my former staff members had been meeting with a psychiatrist who began to point things out to them at a deeper level and help them see how toxic, how dangerous, how unhealthy my interactions were. That I wasn't just having an emotional affair with one person, but I would emotionally lean on other people. So I would gossip. I would do a lot of betrayal, a lot of lying about this person or that person.
Mm.
Uh, there was just a lot of stirring the pot of manipulation to um, really to navigate what to me felt scary or painful or hurtful, but I wasn't in touch with why I was doing it. I'm just thinking this is leadership, but all my leadership was manipulation.
yeah.
And
So
so,
using what I often say is using the currency of guilt and shame,
the currency, is that what you said?
the currency, yeah, a currency of guilt and shame to
Mm,
control and manipulate to keep organizational cohesion, because you didn't have higher leadership levels to do it without using shame, right?
that's
So
good.
sometimes you
Yeah.
have to revert to the lower level of it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's like one thing I tell people, I go, in general, there's not a lot of leadership skills. So in general, in organizations, you see a lot of guilt and shame, control and manipulation. It's not unique to the church, right? People go, oh, the church
Yeah.
hurt me. It's like it's an organization. Like, like there's there's abuse in all organizations, right? And it's just that we don't teach people really effective leadership skills and then give them an all volunteer army and expect them to be able to like keep it moving forward, without the skills. And it's like you're going to revert to the unhealthy stuff pretty quick. So that's kind of my experience with a lot of people. So,
And going back to an earlier question about repentance, what was being looked for, I think part of it was the thought of repentance is you need to go in and find the broken place and fix it. And so I got to work on that. It was 2018, and I'm thinking, all right, I found a guy who does inner healing Zoom calls, and I started working with him 5 days a week for 3 months. I started going to 12-step group. I looked up first, is there like a Liars Anonymous or Narcissists Anonymous? And there is. It's in Washington, D.C., which makes sense. But there was no local one. And so my counselor had said, well, just go to a Sex Addicts Anonymous one, even if you don't feel like it applies. Those guys, they're being honest. It'll serve the same purpose. So I went to Sexaholics Anonymous for 6 months, for a few times a week, and I was going after it. I flew out to Seattle and went to Dr. David Hawkins. There's two of them. So there's the David Hawkins who's the famous author, and then there's David Hawkins on YouTube who has a huge following on YouTube. His channel is all about narcissism, and
oh,
he's one
interesting.
of very, very few voices on YouTube that actually says that it can be healed, that it can be actually changed. So I said, all right, I'll go to his thing. I flew out there, went to an intensive. I'm trying to remember. He's got a statement he makes a lot that's for for a narcissist to change, there has to be a crash. There has to be a
Mm,
absolute crash, and that the crash creates the wake up call for them to change. He has
interesting.
a fortune cookie way of saying it that I
So
can't
you hadn't
recall.
experienced the crash after this point. You were just going, well, I
Yeah,
want to keep my marriage and my ministry, so I will
yeah.
prove to everyone that I'm an overachiever in this area. Will that make you happy? You know?
Well,
Is that good
yeah,
enough? Okay, look, I'm going to the class. Leave me alone now.
yeah. And I thought, okay, this is what repentance is, right? Like I do all this stuff, and but I'm not at that point. I'm not in the mindset of I want to trick people. I'm literally like, okay, I've hurt all these people that I care about. Like I love my friends, my staff, my board members. Like I really care about them, and it was heartbreaking to see these relationships just devastated and gone.
Mhm.
And for them to go from friendships to we are terrified of you or we hate your guts, we never want to hear from you again. It was like, okay, I've got to change because that's something about me is not okay. And
Yeah,
so there was a genuine desire to change, not a desire to pull one over on everybody. And so,
sure.
so I'm headed in this direction, but I'm using whatever tools around me I can get my hands on. Okay, 12-step group, fly to narcissism intensive, inner healing, meeting with Danny Silk on Zoom every week, doing calls with Karen and I. So reading everything I get my hands on. So I'm going after it, but then a more significant crash was actually in 2020. It wasn't as big and spectacular as 2018, but when the counselors started meeting with former staff members and got them seeing how hurt they were and how they were treated and all of that, uh, they started blogging about their experience on staff. My senior
Mhm.
pastor, who was my best friend, who was on my board, uh, they decided to excommunicate me from my church. A letter from him and the trustees: "You're not welcome here anymore." My board, who's supposed to be walking through restoration, half of them said, basically, we don't want to be a part of this anymore. Let's crucify him and move on. The other half are saying, let's try to walk it out and figure it out, however long it takes. And so they agree together, kind of meet in the middle, and send out an updated board letter that is a half crucifixion. So we've walked 2 years down the road. Jonathan's managed to save his marriage, but he's not really doing any better. And so they send out that update. And so all of this is in March of 2020. By the April of 2020, my wife's meeting with a counselor who says, "Listen, I've worked with men like your husband for 40 years. They never change. You need to be preparing yourself for divorce." And
Yeah.
so by the end of April, she says, "You need to get out." This is our second separation. We'd separated right after everything crashed in the fall of 2018. But in 2020, we separated again. And at this point, she's lost hope. She's like, "This is not, you've done everything." Like, she's affirming, like, "Listen, you've worked your butt off. I can see that, but you haven't changed. And
Yeah.
I still see the same patterns. And these are still an issue." And so it was at that point that I felt like I'd tried everything the church had to offer, all the inner healing, all the 12 step, all the whatever. I'd tried everything that was out there, but I had been seeing these videos come through from the Bulletproof Husband, which is a secular organization, but the videos made so much sense to me. And I said, "All right, this is my last try. I'm going to try this program."
Quick question for you. Listening to your story, was there, I seem to remember there was some interesting tr outside the box trauma therapy you did. What was that? You mentioned it, but that was before the Bulletproof Husband though, wasn't it?
It was the same week I started Bulletproof Husband. I flew actually down here to South Carolina, in Spartanburg. They have a thing called Saraset, and they hook all these electrodes up to your scalp, and it listens to the frequencies of your brainwave.
Mhm.
They put it through a computer, and then they feed it back to you as a sound that you listen to.
Yeah,
And the way that one of my board members actually was the one who recommended it to me. And he said, "It's like if you spent your whole life shaving your face in the dark. And then one day somebody turns the light on, you look in the mirror and go, 'Oh, I've always missed this spot. And I didn't know it.' So when your brain hears itself, it can then repair itself." And
yeah.
so I asked him at that point, I said, "Okay, so I've been diagnosed, by a psychiatrist as a narcissist. Did the empathy part of my brain, is it working?" And they checked it on the computer and said, "Yeah, there's nothing wrong with your empathy part, but your fight or flight, uh, adrenals and all that have been, excuse me, stuck on high probably since early childhood, it looks like. So you've been locked up in this hyper defense mechanism for most of your life, and this is your normal." And so when they did this feedback loop where my brain's hearing itself, it starts to rewire things. And over the course of the next month, so I've just joined Bulletproof, I've just had this brain thing happen, and I start having traumatic childhood memories come back to me. And
Yeah.
it was a result of that treatment, started to bring back childhood trauma. And so I'm checking in with my siblings, and I'm asking, like, "Do you remember this?" "Yeah, of course I remember." "Are you telling me you forgot that?" "Yeah, I had no recollection.
No memory, yeah.
I had
It's
blocked out
fascinating the degree to
almost
which
all."
people will forget a bunch of their childhood, like,
Yes,
you know?
which I'd always heard that, if you don't remember the childhood, it's a sign of trauma. But I'm like, yeah, but what do I do about it since I can't recall it? So how do I even address it? So I had felt stuck for years, even in the inner healing process. It
I'll
was like, I
I'll
don't have
give
memory.
you I'll give an interesting analogy, okay? It's like God has given us certain aspects of our nervous system to help us protect us and keep us safe, right? Like if I look on the ground and there's a big rattlesnake, I'm going to jump out of the way. Like, Steve, don't you think you should pray about it? Don't you think you should cost benefit analysis? Like, no, like, does that make sense?
Yeah,
And if I was like, hey, Jonathan, look, let's do some, I want to do some talk therapy, some scripture memorization, maybe memorize the 91st Psalm. I just want to make sure that you're super comfortable stepping out in front of a moving city bus. And you're like, no, like, no, right? And what happens is some people go through trauma, right?
Mm,
And what is safe and not safe gets rewired,
mm,
right? Stuff, and all of a sudden you're like, I don't know why, but I can't overcome that. I don't know why I'm behaving that way. Well, it's like, kind of the joke is like, you know, here I am, I'm doing all this personal development work. I think I'm making great progress. It's like, yeah, but what about your subconscious? Like you're basically an ant. You think you're making progress, but you're on the back of an elephant that's going the other direction. It's like,
mm.
forget about it. And so sometimes you've got to do this really outside the box type stuff to crack stuff down and go, okay, there is the easy blue click, and then you can shift it. But without that, it's like, nope. Like, yeah, here, play with the rattlesnake. You're like, oh no, I will not. And I think, a lot of times what you see is this our value and our identity, and where we to protect that, we will do anything, right? Like it's like, hey, oh, you're doing lifeguard course. Look, be careful saving drowning people because they will drown you. Like, and
Yeah.
it's like, why do people do this insane stuff? It's to protect their identity. And it's not like, oh, it does not make sense that if someone gives me the finger and cuts me off in traffic, that I should run them off the road and shoot them. It's like, that's not logical, but screw being logical. Like I'm protecting my identity, my value at
Mm.
all costs, And so, it's like the trauma that you're about to talk about. It's like, oh yeah, like some stuff got rewired, and it's like you're not acting logical anymore. You're just in survival mode, right?
Mm.
And to talk you out of it is like, yeah, good luck.
Yeah, yeah, and that was my feeling with a lot of these is because I couldn't remember. I was like, all right, I'm trying to fix something, but I don't know what's driving it. What's really underneath there? The elephant that's going the other direction. I can't see the elephant, and so
Yeah,
that was definitely my experience as well. I kind of think there was a one-two punch that was really helpful for me in that Sarasat brought up the memories, uh, but if I didn't have Bulletproof Husband to actually create a new structure and help me deal with the issues and help me move forward, uh, I wouldn't have had anything. I wouldn't have had the long-term changes. So
yeah,
Sarasat was really good for like tilling the soil, but I needed a new way of being, of actually
sure,
how do I be a man? And that was what the path they provided. Um, Things like metaphors that really help for men to understand some of these issues. Like I love the ant and the elephant, perfect metaphor for things. But even in this program, the reason they call it bulletproof is they refer to your emotional wounds as bullets. And so you're 7 years old, and the teacher stands you up in front of class, has you spell something on the whiteboard, and you get it wrong, and everybody laughs. And you tell yourself, this happened because I'm stupid. And so
yeah,
then what do? You spend the rest of your life getting a doctorate degree and reading a bunch of books and starting a school and everything else because deep down you feel like that stupid 7-year old. And
yeah,
so you carry that, we call it the stupid bullet. And you carry that through your life. And then every time your wife corrects you about something, you feel like she's taking her finger and sticking it in your bullet hole. And you're now feeling like a 7-year-old child and the shame of that I am stupid. And so defenses and lying and manipulation and reaction and explosion or shutting down and stonewalling and gaslighting and all of the stuff as a survival reaction
sure,
to, well, you're the one who stuck your finger in my bullet hole. And that's one of the great things about the feminine is that they help the masculine see their bullet holes. It's one of the best parts about marrying a woman is that she's going to stick her finger in every one of those because the feminine's looking for safety and she's going, hey, that doesn't look safe. So I need to poke at it and test it. And you go,
Yeah.
ow, why did I do that? Why did I marry such a mean woman? And so for most guys, they think they married this woman who's so mean to them, and she didn't act like this when we were dating. But 6 months into a marriage, the woman knows all your bullet holes, and she's poking at them because we're supposed to deal with them. It actually makes us a better man when we can deal with those bullet holes and get them healthy and strong.
Yeah.
But
I
that was the
I
process.
have major issues with my wife. Like it's something I need to work on as well. It's like, ah, you know,
Yeah.
and I will say, this thing, this is our first time meeting and talking, but I have vague memories of looking at some of your social media stuff years ago, because you take um a certain theology and then defend it. Does that make sense? Like that isn't always right. And my impression was I would not want to get in a debate with that dude. That makes sense.
Yeah, it
Because like,
does.
oh, you pick one. I'm like, you will like you bring it on. We will embarrass you intellectually. Does that make sense?
Yes, it
And so
does.
I'm sure that played a role in your relationships with other people too, or your wife, or like, oh yeah, well, I will outmaneuver you.
It's true. It's true. And with in my close relationships, so like intimate relationships, my wife in particular, what she would experience most often was the stonewalling. So she's an extrovert. She loves life. She's a big outgoing person, and uh, so when she's upset about something, she's vocal about it, and I'm more quiet, more introverted, and so uh, I would experience it as criticism. And the as I was mentioning the bullet metaphor, stupid was a big one for me. A couple other ones that were big for me were loser and evil and weak. And the weak bullet in particular drives a lot of control and manipulation and a lot of reaction to the feminine because I would constantly feel emasculated in my relationship. And so, this constant feeling of I'm being criticized, I'm being whatever, I would shut down and I'd pull away and maybe not talk for 2 days. And, just all of that retreating behavior. And if you listen to most counseling out there, it's like, well, you need to come up to the surface and share your feelings with I feel statements and try to share what's going on in your internal world and be vulnerable and all of this. When in reality, when I would try to do that, it was then received as gaslighting, which it was, but it was also to me my genuine feelings. But
Yeah.
I'm projecting on her my feelings that are actually coming from my own trauma of my own childhood. So a couple weeks into the program, I remember being over at the house. We're still separated at this point, but she had me doing like some house projects. So I'm taking care of some stuff. She comes out, she's looking at it. She's like, "Oh, this is great. I love it." And I said, "Can I share something with you? I'm learning from my program." And she said, "Yeah, sure." And I said, I'm coming to realize that for years I've told you that you were controlling. And I've realized that I'm projecting on you the control I felt when I was little from my mom and my sisters. And I've put that on you, and you've never been controlling. And man, she's tearing up, and she said, Thank you for sharing that." And now a couple of years, 3 years later, she said that was when I started to see you were finally getting it. Like it was finally turning, that you were not going to continue to project onto me stuff that you brought into this, that was your stuff. And
Yeah.
it was that process of owning the fact that that my wife over the years, she didn't make me feel certain way. She made me feel my own feelings. So she'd poke at something and I'd feel something, but I felt it because it was already there.
Yeah,
She's just
interesting.
jostling it. And I'm like, oh, but I would blame her for it and try to control her and try and change her behavior so that it wouldn't make me feel that way in the future, instead of actually going, well, that's actually me. That has nothing to do with you. That's not your fault that I felt that way inside. And I don't need to change you because of that.
I had,
So,
one of the things I find so fascinating is the degree to which we interact with our world. And it's like I tell people, I go, look, your conscious mind has to filter out so much information that the information comes in, it compares against your subconscious beliefs. Life is, I am, people are. And if it doesn't match it, we'll either ignore it like it never happened or pervert it to match it, like to a freaky degree. And there's certain people who their brains don't make shortcuts and they have some really weird issues. Like if my wife didn't do, her brain didn't do that and I shaved, she would literally not recognize me. Like I walk in the house, she like stranger, which sounds bizarre, but that sounds bizarre because your brain makes shortcuts, right? And we
mm,
all know that this happens because we will say or do things that other people will take to mean something we never meant, right? So we know you're misinterpreting the situation, right? But we never go, to what degree is my reality complete BS, right? And one of the most interesting examples I saw of this was working with my older sister who had a lot of guilt and shame in her marriage, a lot of stress, got divorced, moved to Hawaii, dealt with a lot of depression, then moved closer to me in Texas. And like we sound a little similar because my wife is super outgoing. I'm much more an introvert. Like, so we're dealing with some similar situations. But my wife had introduced my sister to a bunch of people at our church, right? And one Sunday, one of my sister's beliefs was other people don't think that I'm worth investing in for a relationship,
mm, okay.
right? Like people don't care enough about me to be in a relationship.
Yeah.
And we need connection to like survive in life, right? So, but my wife had been introducing her to people at church. And one Sunday after the service, I'm standing next to her, right? After the service, and three people walk up to her and they all say the same three things. They acknowledge her, they affirm her, they invite her into a deeper relationship. Like, Jonathan,
Huh.
man, it's amazing. It's great to see you today, man. You're just awesome. Dude, we should have beer sometime, hang out. I'd love to get to know you better or something. Right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
30 minutes later over lunch, my sister says this to me, you know, it's really hard to make connections with people at that church. I'm like, what? I go,
Yeah.
oh my, like your brain is like lying to you. Does that make sense? Your reality is like you can check it at the door, right? And she changed that belief, um, and later made a group of women offered her a connection, and this time she saw it and it changed her whole life, right?
Mhm.
But I had this one personal experience that kind of freaked me out a bit. I was um, in a classroom, like in a hotel classroom style setting for training. So you have rows of chairs, right? And this young woman comes in and she sits one row in front of me, three seats to my right. And I glance at her, just glance, don't, not a lot of time, but oh, I looked at her and looked back. And what I noticed is she's very cute, short dark hair. It was summer. She had a spaghetti step type dress, but down her back, starting at her hairline through her dress, there was a gray surgery scar running down her back, like about the width of my thumb. So you're looking at her like, oh my God, like, does she have her whole spine fused? Or was she in a car accident? I bet she's in pain, all this type of stuff, right?
Yeah.
About 45 minutes later, I look back and guess what? She had no scar. There was like something, lighting, something, my brain, boom, made a shortcut. I would have perjured myself in court over that.
Wow. Wow.
Wow. So I'm like, what do I hold on to as reality, especially in relationships, like what other people think, what they like, all this that is fundamentally not even true, not even close, right? And so it's like if we can start going, okay, maybe my version of reality, like what that I hold to be fundamentally true. Maybe it's just BS. That makes sense. Maybe
Mhm.
I'm making some crazy stuff up. Like maybe I'm open that it's not,
Yeah.
it could be totally like, I don't know, man, you know. So, but people don't realize that. So like, oh, I know you meant this. Like,
Right.
what? No, never happened. Like it never happened. Like it never happened. Like you just made all that up. Right. So, anyways, it's like if people can realize that, sometimes you can let go of this stuff. You're like, I've been holding on to that. Like, let go.
Mhm.
Maybe reality is different, you know. So, anyways, so you're
Wow.
making progress with your wife,
Yeah.
realizing that you had put some stuff on her, which was like your version of reality was wrong, right? You're like, oh my God,
Yeah. Yeah.
she
And there
never
was
did
a
that to
lot.
me. That was all me. Like, mind
Exactly.
blown.
And have you ever read Extreme Ownership, Jocko Willink? Are you familiar with Jocko?
Yeah, very familiar with Jocko. Love that guy. Yes.
Okay.
I think I have read some of his book. Yeah, it's like a leadership book. Like
Yes.
you own it, just own it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's such a huge principle that was carried over into Bulletproof that was really helpful for me is inside of marriage to take 100% responsibility, which I think of most marriage counseling is kind of like, let's say you're sitting on a couch with your wife, the marriage counselor's sitting across from you, there's a coffee table in the middle with a big dog turd on it. And most marriage counseling is, how do we cut this turd in half and equally share the responsibility for cleaning it up? You know,
Yeah.
that's your half, this is my half. Instead of, I'm the leader, I brought this dog into this house, so it's my responsibility to clean this up. I'm going to clean it up, clean it up, clean it up, clean it up. And through my leadership and the example I set over time, now whoever's following me, whether it's employees or kids or wife or whatever, in that relationship, they go, you know, I'll take care of it this time. But that's because it's been demonstrated through my leadership and my responsibility that now they want to take on some responsibility. So, my one of our challenges to men in your marriage, if you're recognizing that you as a man are the leader of your marriage and your wife is on your team, you're the CEO. If your business fails, who's responsible? Well, you are. The CEO is always responsible. And he can point the finger and say, yeah, but the CFO was embezzling all the funds. Well, yeah, maybe your wife's having an affair, maybe she's cheating, maybe she's, you know, stealing money out of the bank account, maxing out the credit cards. You know, maybe she's doing all this stuff because we hear all the crazy stories from men. And maybe she's doing all that. But at the end of the day, you're responsible because you're the leader, you're the CEO. She's the CFO, and your leadership has allowed that, either through you didn't lead the relationship to a healthy place where, you know, you're meeting her needs. Maybe, you know, when you stood at the altar and you said, I'm going to love, honor, and cherish you, and then you didn't do that. And now she emotionally starves to death in the relationship and goes out and has an emotional affair with somebody. How can you take responsibility as the leader? Because typically, especially what I've seen in counseling situations, is dividing up the responsibility,
Yeah.
and that's really more about who's at fault or who's to blame. You know, if your kicker misses the field goal, he's to blame. He's at fault. It was his mistake, but the head coach is the one who's responsible. He failed to train. He failed to get him to the point that he would never miss the field goal. So responsibility versus blame and fault is such a huge difference. And so that difference of reality, here's my reality that I'm bringing in, but it's not that I have to, no longer do I have to project it on her and then gaslight her with it, but also I take responsibility for it and say, you know what, I'm feeling this way, and that's me. I'm going to go deal with these feelings. And that's not your fault that I'm feeling this way, because it was always, how do I change this other person because of how they're making me feel? And that was the feeling back and forth is I feel like she's trying to control my way of being, and I'm trying to control her way of being so that we're both okay. And that would lead to basically a constant cycle of, whether it's the YouTube narcissistic cycle of abuse, or, in our case, it just felt like every week there was some sort of big argument. Then I would shut down, pull away till everything seemed to quiet down. Then we'd reconnect. Then it would blow up into the next big argument, and we'd cycle around in that circle over and over again. So having walked that through and going, I can actually put a stop to this by being responsible. And when I'm responsible, we don't have to argue at all. Anytime I feel poked, triggered, I can pause and step away. Because I'd tried all the other things, whether it was boundaries, hey, I don't feel respected. Let's start this conversation again when you're going to talk to me in such a way. And that always really just felt controlling. And now I'm controlling how she's communicating her hurt and her pain and her feelings. So it never actually made any progress
Yeah.
until I could actually step back from it and be responsible. So responsibility was a huge piece of the puzzle for me, which is, I think, the opposite of narcissism in so many ways. One of the insightful things I found along the way, there was a book called Disarming the Narcissist, and it's more of an academic book talking about the studies of what they found, and medically. And what they're saying in the book is essentially everybody is born a narcissist. That infant that's crying in the middle of the night at 6 months old doesn't give a crap about your sleep and your feelings. Zero empathy. They just want what they want. And on a scale of 10 being the most compassionate Gandhi person and 0 being the most narcissistic, every human being starts at 0. And that as we grow and mature, we become more empathetic. And that what we call as an adult a narcissist is somebody who got stuck at low down the scale. So maybe I got stuck at a 3, and most normal people are a 6, and maybe a really good spiritual leader is like an 8, something like that. But there's this scale. And so when the childhood trauma comes in, narcissists get stuck at that low end of the scale, and they don't keep moving up. But when you actually step back into starting to take responsibility says, I need to go back to the fact that this is me stuck in my 7-year-old self right now. And I need to re-feel those feelings, feel them to heal them, and reparent this moment and walk forward up the scale. And so she started to see, and I think this was the one of the major shifts for her, is she started to see that when she was poking at me in her feminine way of communicating, that instead of shutting down and pulling away, I would show up and listen and care.
Yeah.
Like, wait, you're saying that when I did this, it made you feel like that? Yes, that's what I'm saying. Okay, wait. So is this something I normally do? Yes, you've been doing it for years. I've been telling you for a decade and a half. Okay, can you help me see this? Can you give me 3 other times maybe that I did this? Yeah, that. Wow. Okay, I'm going to take a look at this, and I will see where it's coming from, and I'll let you know what I find out. Thank you for sharing
Yeah.
this with me. And she's like, "Holy crap, where did this guy come from?" And that was some of the stuff she started to see in those first couple months. Somewhere along the way, they also began to teach men how to actually clean up some of those past behaviors, which through they call it bulletproof apologies, and it has 7 components to it, which includes owning the behavior, taking responsibility, explaining where it came from, why you've been acting this way, um, empathizing with how it's impacted her. And I I started crafting these, and I would sit down and I'd share them with her, and I'd read through like oh, let's see. One of the big ones was I did one on the topic of anniversaries, birthdays, vacations, and holidays, which were always a huge trigger. There was this internal pressure that would come up, and by the third or fourth day of a vacation, I would I would explode. I'd lose it.
Yeah.
I'd push all these feelings down, and then boom, you know. And so she knew.
So was there pressure, you felt pressure from her to show up a certain way on those events? Or
Yes, and I
yeah,
didn't have the boundaries inside myself for valuing myself to take care of myself. So let's say we're going to go on vacation and I'm going to be with her and the kids and managing everything for 16 hours a day. And yet I know I actually need to take an hour and go lay in a hammock and take a nap. But
yeah,
I'm going to put myself down the value list. And by the third or fourth day, I've now given out everything. I feel like a total martyr, a total victim of this vacation, and I explode. And so I explode, and then I go take time alone and actually meet that need of needing that alone time instead of actually meeting it in a healthy way before that on day one to say, okay, we can go out. That'll be great. I'm all in. And then from 2 to 4 this afternoon, I'd like to go see a movie this afternoon. Does that work?
yeah,
Yeah, that works. Okay, great. But I couldn't actually voice anything for myself because I didn't have that value for myself. And that's the weird thing of, the way that pop culture labels narcissism as, you're someone who's in love with themselves, but actually narcissists, at least covert narcissists, often put themselves last and don't have any value for themselves, don't actually take care of themselves in a proactive, healthy way. And
yeah,
so that was one of the good examples in that apology was I was able to bring up, hey, when we went on this vacation for our 10-year wedding anniversary, and I did this and this and this, I would imagine that it made you feel like this and this and this. And so it started to communicate that empathy of I understand how I've acted. Here's an example. Here's how it must have made you feel. And then you ask, is there anything else that I missed? And she opened up and shared for about an hour of other examples of things over the years that had made her feel like that. And I said, okay, thank you for sharing all that. Is there anything else? No. Okay. Can I You want me to finish the letter? Oh, I forgot you were even reading a letter to me. And we had this about every 3 weeks or so. I would bring another one with some ownership of another thing, being controlling, lying, hiding stuff, um, using other people to meet my emotional needs, blowing up with holidays and anniversaries. Like so, uh, it was this process of cleaning up and taking ownership
sure.
of all those things. And so,
I
yeah,
find
yeah,
uh, in my relationship, often the big fights are like she'll bring something up and I'll apologize, and then she'll say that I didn't apologize properly, and will lose it. To be like, do you now understand what I'm feeling? I'm like, what are you even talking about? Like how? Like I don't know, maybe. Like you know, that's oh yeah, like that's probably my personal triggers. Because it's I think you and I are a little bit similar, and
yeah,
your wife and my wife also probably a little similar. It's like um like my wife says Steve has low empathy, but he does care. Does that make sense? Right.
interesting. Okay,
Yeah. So like I can it helps me in working with people who have major trauma. Like you could tell me the most horrible thing that's ever happened, like that I've ever heard of. And like, no, and it doesn't go, I feel it. I go, okay, I'm really excited to fix this puzzle for you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So in some ways it's helpful for me because I can deal with people in deep trauma and not get worn out, but I do actually care about it. But like sometimes what my wife wants me is to feel what she's feeling. And I'm like, I'm having some problems with that, you know? So
Right.
I understand a lot of this does make sense, you know,
Yeah.
and the quality of the apology so that she feels heard and
Yeah. Yes.
understood. And that's, you know, that's something I personally have to work all really improve on is because I'm, you know, because I am the like I do everything for everyone all the time and I get worn out. One thing that I thought as you're sitting here talking that I found really fascinating is Dr. Great, the guy who wrote Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus,
Yeah.
wrote a secondary book, but there were some fascinating aspects to it where he talked about hormone levels
Mm,
and how quickly they can change. Does that make sense?
okay.
And he says one thing that will happen is when the husband and wife are in conflict, and the wife is like, "You have to talk. We have to deal with this right now." Does that make sense? He goes,
Yeah.
"One thing that will actually happen is the testosterone levels in men will start dropping in that situation."
Mm,
And it's actually when testosterone is low, you can't handle stress as well.
mm,
And then you react. Does that make sense? So it's like this,
yeah.
it's this, it's this certain type of interaction where the testosterone levels start dropping,
Mm,
that they get too low, then you explode because you don't have the bandwidth. Does that make sense?
yes, it
So he
does.
talks about different techniques of going, okay, I hear you, but I got to go in my cave and boot up my testosterone levels. Then I can come back and I've got the ability to handle it,
Mm,
which I always thought was very interesting because we don't realize how much physiology can impact certain situations. You know, it's like, I can't handle it. It's like, okay, well, maybe you need therapy. Maybe you need to, you know,
mm,
go to the gym and hit the weights so you have the proper biochemistry in your brain to actually handle stress. Right.
mm.
So there's, you know, I think
It
there's
would make
always different
sense.
things.
It would make sense to me too that if she's poking at a bullet hole that you're emotionally feeling and it's taking you back to feeling like you're seven, that your body is reacting to that and taking you backward. And now you feel like that child inside. And
Sure.
you
Yeah.
know, that 7-year-old's not
You're
loaded with
feeling weaker and
levels.
weaker and weaker. And then, you know, you react violently to protect yourself, you know.
Yes, big
So
reaction. Yeah. Well, I know for us, one of the metaphors that was really helpful is the idea that she thinks the sky is pink. That's one of our regular go-to metaphors in the program that was so helpful. Is that for a lot of guys, if your wife came to you and said, you know, Stephen, I just think the sky's pink. And you're like, no, it's blue. I can Google it. I can call a meteorologist. I can pull the encyclopedia off the shelf. Everybody knows it's blue. What are you talking about? I could call our marriage counselor right now. Everybody knows it's blue. What are you talking about? It's pink. This is how most guys, and they say, you know, we're logical, you know, that concept, but that we get into our head and we're trying to argue the facts of the conflict when if we can actually stop and go, wait, pink. So tell me more. Is it like a hot pink? Is it a soft pink? Is it fluorescent? Is it neon? Like when you say pink, what does that look like for you? What are you feeling that it's pink? Well, it's it's like a soft pink. Maybe it's not really pink. You know, actually, I think it is blue. I think you're right. It's literally the moment of actually feeling heard and understood and appreciated and valued causes the feminine to actually shift. They can actually shift once they feel heard. But up to that point, you just have this like illogical conflict with each other where you know you're banging heads over the topic instead of actually show up, help her feel heard, help her feel understood, help her explain what she's feeling. And then once it's out, it totally shifts. And men don't think like that because, it's like when we say the statement, be a man of your word. It's not be a woman of your word, it's be a man of your word. So when we say something, we usually have already processed it inside. And so now we're throwing it out there, and this is what we mean.
Yeah.
So we see a lot of guys that they show up in the program and they're like, "Well, my wife said she wants a divorce." Okay, well, so that's why you went and hired a lawyer and started the divorce process? Yeah. Well, from the feminine side, she's actually just expressing, saying, I don't want I don't want to be married to you this way. This sucks. I don't want to keep doing this. But he hears it as take action, and he's taken action. He's gone out and got a lawyer. He's starting to push down this road of litigation. And she's like, I was just saying I don't want to be married like this.
Yeah.
And we see this mistake all the time with guys who, instead of stop, okay, you don't want to be married. Tell me more. What's making you feel that way? Well, you never listen. You're probably right. Could you tell me more about how that makes you feel? Unseen, unheard. And she starts pulling it out, and you can actually care for it, empathize, and make her feel heard. Like that was the thing. I think a lot of misunderstanding about empathy when guys hear it, especially from women. The description makes it sound like you have to put yourself in their shoes and feel what they're feeling, when in reality a lot of empathy is actually showing up and helping them feel heard.
Yeah.
I don't think the sky's pink. And just because you tell me it's pink, I don't see it as pink. But the fact that I'm going to show up and care and go, tell me more about how the sky's pink. What color pink? What does that look like? How long has it looked pink to you? Well, since I was 4 years old. And when she's actually feeling heard and seen, she feels like you're showing up and understanding her, even though you don't agree, even though you don't really understand, but you're being understanding.
Yeah.
That
Have
feels, that's
have you
empathy.
have you ever heard of the connection codes?
Yes, yes.
Right. Like one of the things I did this course with my wife, and one of it, and it is just someone's talking and just keeps saying, ooh, 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 ooh. Right. And for me, I'm like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Like, but if I do it, my wife feels like we're connecting. And if I forget, she goes, you're not oohing me. I'm like, okay, ooh, 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 ooh. And I'm like, this is, I don't understand this, but it works. Does that make sense? I'm like, oh my God, like that
Yeah.
worked. One of the craziest examples I heard is super fascinating. I was listening to NPR or something, and this um, researcher had done research on psychopaths. Okay, using brain scans, like that their brain had very particular patterns, like there was like
Yeah.
they were wired this way, right? And so they'd finished the research study, and he was cleaning up some stuff, and so they didn't put names on the brain scans. Does that make sense? There's
Okay.
numbers, right? So it was like more disconnected, right?
Yeah.
So he was cleaning stuff up, and he came across this one brain scan, and he was like, "Holy crap!" Based on what I know now, we better track this dude down. Make sure he's not like stuffing bodies in his basement. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Well,
Yep.
guess whose brain scan it was? It was his.
It is. Yeah.
He's like, "Oh my God!" So he's like, "Really?" Because he didn't. He's like, asked people, "It's like, could this be true?" And they're like, "Well, yeah. I mean, you're always trying to control situations, and you're always like this weird, maneuvering all the time." And he's like, "Okay." He goes, "So what I did from then on in a situation, I would ask myself, what would just what would a person with empathy do?"
Mm,
Because I would do that. Not that he wanted to or to make sense, or he's like, okay, well, what would a person with empathy do?
wow.
Well, do it. I'm like, how interesting. But that's a bit, it's like a bit like I don't have high empathy. So like you're talking about, like I have to learn the skill set of okay, this is these 5 steps. Why are we doing this? I have no idea. It doesn't make sense, but it seems to work. It's like, well, we'll
Yeah.
just move forward. Right? Like probably like you, like my wife and I are like polar opposite on first, like only one of us ever has to take a personality test because if she's here, I just know that I'm over here. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We save ourselves money because it's like, and so, I'm all about like have a degree in economics and business term, and I'm like, efficient. That makes sense. And she's
Yeah.
like, okay, let's do this thing together. I'm like, together? That like cuts our efficiency in half. That doesn't make any sense at all, right? I'm like, you're driving me crazy. I mean, we're losing like efficiency here, and I gotta like overcome that. Like, okay, we'll do it together. We won't get anywhere nearly as done, but it's about connection, I guess. So,
Oh.
so those are my struggles here. So, what if someone watching this is like, okay, I'd like to do this bulletproof husband thing. Like, what do I do? I think you're a coach. Would they contact you and go, okay, I need some help here? Um, and how much of it is like coursework and how much of it has to do with like community? Does that make sense? Because it seemed like in listening to your story, you went on some retreats that were like full of conflicts, to get you to like a whole bunch of people in your face to shift some things. How much of it involves that?
So there's really three legs to the program. There's there's the videos that are the actual curriculum, the material, and the day somebody signs up, there's about 30 videos that get unlocked for them, and then every 30 days there's another batch of videos. So the curriculum is ongoing, and it builds as you go. So you have that. And then another leg is the Facebook group. And there's about 800 members in the program and about 30 coaches. And so the coaches are in the group every day answering questions, interacting with men. There's men all over Australia, Europe, North America. So any time of day, somebody could post something. Hey, she just took the kids and emptied the bank account and she's gone. What do I do? And there's going to be men who can jump right in because of all the time zones and everything, and give wisdom, feedback, ask questions, all of that. So you have this engaged community. And then the third leg is calls. And so the calls are Zoom calls, but they're not face to face, sit in front of a computer Zoom call. It's audio because there's usually about 100 guys on a call. And they have calls almost every day of the week now. When I started, there was 2 calls, and they've built up from there. But usually the calls are about 3 hours long, and they'll be run by some of the head coaches, and they're interacting. So 3 hours on a Monday night would be 3 hours of men who've submitted questions. Hey, I'm in a stage 2 relationship. I'm trying to rebuild trust. How do I navigate this specific situation? And then that man would unmute and the head coach would unmute and they would talk through that question. And so they'll deal with, 30, 40 questions on a 3 hour call and dig through that stuff with men. So it's very interactive, very engaging, which creates, part of the way that they approach things is so direct, and that was one of the things I had just never experienced in church, and so this extremely direct, confrontational way of communicating was a total shock to my system, and was something that when I saw it, I knew I want that. I want to be like that. I want to actually move in that direction, but I don't know how to get there because I am a manipulative, stonewalling, gaslighting, introvert, nice guy, people pleaser, approval seeker. How do I become the kind of guy who's just going to say it to you directly and clearly and straightforward, and hold the line if you don't agree, and I'm going to keep pushing it back across the table. And so that was a huge shift, that most guys don't have an environment like that. Maybe you have a
Yeah.
boss who's very controlling and direct, but you just have to do what he says. Different than just a man who's saying, hey, if you keep acting like that, your kids are only going to be with you half the time. So what do you need to change in your behavior so that your marriage can work? Well, I don't know. Well, I have a couple suggestions. Are you open to hearing those? Yeah. And, just that, kind of
Love it.
communication is just not, it's rare. It's rare masculine communication. And so you have the calls, you have the curriculum, and you have the community. And those three together are the main components. And yes, when I joined, it was smaller. The program was about 150 men, and I got invited to be in the first batch of coaches that got trained. I became the first certified coach in the program, and they've asked me to write their book on their material, and that should be coming out later this summer. And if somebody is interested or needs it, for them, their husband, their friend, themselves, uh, they can look at. I share my experience, and my wife shares her testimony of how she experienced the program through me, on it's called bulletproofdocjon.com, which is DOCJON. That's just what they call me in the program. The guys know me as Doc John. So bulletproofdocjon.com is the landing page if people want more information about the program. Um, but yeah, it's a monthly membership, which is great because there's lots of men's programs out there right now, and most of them are usually you pay one time $5,000 and then you have this program forever. But instead, with them, it's $300 per month, and you stay as long as you need to. And
Yeah.
we have guys who stay a few years, and we have guys who stay a few months and get their marriage,
Sure.
going
Must
again
cheap.
and
Divorce
forward.
is expensive.
True. That's true. The typical one is between 30 and $35,000. So it's like, well, you could pay.
Yeah, and you like detour your entire life, you know. It's like, one thing that I'm reminded, one of my mentors said this. He goes, environment and associations can take you where you can't go on your own.
Well,
Environment and associations can take you where you can't go on your own. And so that level of community is super important. It's like, but that's with everything. Sometimes I joke with people. I go, "Hey, there's one thing you could do that if you did this one thing, I promise you would get in shape." They're like, "What is it?" I go, "You move to Aspen, Colorado." They're like, "What?" They go, "Everyone in Aspen is in shape. You understand? Like, I lived there. The radio DJ was overweight, but that was it. If otherwise you saw an overweight person, tourist guaranteed, right? So you're not going to show up in Aspen and be a below average for very long.
mm,
You understand?
yeah,
It's like, yeah, you're going to start doing and acting like everyone around you. All right. Conversely, you can't be super fit and move to some area where no one is fit and none of your friends exercise and everyone eats junk food all day. Like, you think you're going to be stay above average for a long time? Yeah, you're fooling yourself, right? And so it's like if you put yourself in a very intense environment where it's like, this is what we do, this is how we behave, right?
yeah,
It allows you to make some changes that, you know, I don't, you're not getting that type of, and this is from someone who does one-on-one coaching, whatever, with people. It's like you're not getting that with therapy, right?
yeah,
One-on-one counseling, you don't have that structure to move you.
yeah,
It's like, oh, your dog's misbehaving. Put him in a pack with a bunch of other dogs who behave. He'll get his act together in a hurry. Does that make sense? Like,
Yes, it does.
boom.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
anyways,
Yes. The community is a huge part of it. And even I think the curriculum is in the same way that I've done talk therapy. You go in, you talk for 55 minutes, and then they give you a little bit of homework at the end. And it's like, well, I don't know what just happened here. Like, I just talked for an hour. And instead of, here's the model that you can actually build your new person around, a new way of being to move toward. And never having had that structure before. Because I remember being 17 years old and going to different mentors that I had at my church and saying, what is it to be a man? How do I be a man? And reading Wild at Heart, reading Every Man's Battle, reading these things kind of leave you with this feeling of like you're supposed to be initiated. There's supposed to be a ritual, and then you're a man. It's like, yeah, but that doesn't tell me how to actually be a man when my wife is communicating to me in a certain way and I feel completely emasculated and deflated and I want to react and get angry and respond. I don't know how to be a man. And that was such a huge missing piece that they lay out so clearly. Here is how to be a solid, reliable, consistent masculine man and
yeah.
how to live that out. And that was vital. But then the community reinforces it because then when somebody is not being that, you can point them back to, hey, this you're out of congruence with this. You're out of integrity with what it is to be 100% responsible, to be accountable, to be in integrity, to know your terms and live your principles, and to actually have a structure that the community can hold you to was the other important piece to that. So,
Yeah.
same
Awesome.
as
Love it.
move to Aspen and everybody's going to run and eat vegetables and whatever.
I
There's
did last year. I did Jason Valaton's Brave Co community
yeah,
event, which is so. I think there's a movement to this, which I think is excellent.
there's a
So,
hunger. There's a hunger for sure.
last question for you. So, having talked about, okay, here's how we recover narcissist. There's some situation, it's like I don't want women who are already, have think that they have to sacrifice their whole life on the altar of staying married, right? As if God cares more about the covenant of marriage than actually the person, right?
Mhm, mhm.
So, how is there any advice on how does someone evaluate a relationship and a person of go, okay, now this is recoverable versus, man, you need to like not sacrifice your entire life in this situation because probably not going to change. And
Mm.
any insight on that advice for people?
Yeah, I love that question. I think it's such a practical way to wrap together because it's really important. I think so often it sounds imbalanced one way or the other. We always have to believe for restoration, or the other side of just get divorced over anything, and to land somewhere that says there's. I mean, scripturally speaking, we know Jesus quotes and says that Moses gave you the certificate of divorce because of the hardness of heart. Divorce always goes to hardness of heart. That's where it comes from. And it doesn't have to be two hard hearts. It could be one that says, I will not change. This is who I am. I'm going to stay this way. And I'm hardened into that. That might be the man who's emotionally abusive and doing all these behaviors, and he's stuck in that. That might create the space to say, if he's not going to, then I have every right to move toward the certificate of divorce. Yet, can any situation be recovered? I believe so. I've seen some of the craziest stuff over the last 3 years and things that um, we've interacted with and coached and seen change, that I have hope for any man to be able to change and become the kind of husband that the wife would be a fool to leave. That doesn't mean she would uh, necessarily stay. There's women who the husband has changed and he's become a tremendous, different, wonderful husband and father, and yet she still is not able to stay with him because of her own hurts and stuff that she needs to
Sure.
process. So we see that too. But I would say the woman's responsibility that would help in these situations is your job is to give him what we call the slap. Give him the slap. In the same way that a 400-pound man needs a heart attack to say, hey, change your life, you're going to die. A husband, a man, needs a slap from his wife that says, this is no longer acceptable to me. You're going to sleep on the couch, or you're going to move out, or I'm going to file legal separation papers, or we're not having sex anymore. Like, depending on what the severity of the situation, depends on what kind of slap is needed. So, there's a scale, a slap scale, let's say, of what's needed. But when she provides that slap and then holds the boundaries, it creates the space and the pressure for him to go out and do what he needs to do to change. And then it's his job, it's his responsibility to re-earn her trust. You talked about guilt and shame as a currency. We use trust as a currency. And that for a man, he typically, by the time he gets the slap, she's been thinking about divorce for at least 2 years on average before she'll give the slap. And when she gives the slap, he is at a deficit of, he has a negative $1 million of trust in the emotional bank account. So he's overdrafted the trust in the relationship massively. Maybe it's the alcoholism or the screaming and yelling and throwing plates or whatever he's done has created an overdraft, a deficit of trust in the emotional safety in the bank account. He will have to rebuild that trust over time by coming back and taking responsibility, by empathizing, by taking ownership, by these different ways of showing up that will rebuild that trust. And so her responsibility would be provide the slap and hold the boundary, and then his job is to go out and take that space that's been created and re-earn the trust to rebuild the relationship. We say it takes two people to have a long-term relationship work, but it only takes one to rebuild the relationship. So by the time a woman
Interesting. Yeah.
actually she gives the slap, she's done. She's fried, she's burnt, she has nothing left to give. For her to finally give the slap, she's done. Like when she says, I want a divorce, I'm I'm done. He thinks, oh, we need to go to marriage counseling. And now he kicks into action. She's done. She doesn't want to put another ounce of effort out. And so there's a total disconnect. And for a lot of guys, they think, well, why isn't she willing to work on it? In her mind, she thinks she has been working on it. But to a guy, she's just been being mean to me all these years. She hasn't been working on it. And so she finally gives the slap. He's finally ready and willing and has motivation and enough pressure to work on it, but she's done. And so if a man will do what he needs to do, he can rebuild the trust and safety in the relationship, and then they can walk and carry the relationship together. But at that point, the man needs to do the work, and she needs to take her hands off and let him rebuild the trust.
Yeah.
So that's always our,
So
my wife and
if a woman gives a slap and what
yeah,
she gets back is gaslighting, control, manipulation, shame, and that doesn't change, there
just
you
hold the
go.
line. And she can hold the line as long as she needs to, and maybe
Yeah.
up the level of the slap. Maybe it's, no sex. Maybe it's you're sleeping in different rooms. Maybe now you need to move out, or I'm going to move out, or I'm going to file papers. And she continues to escalate. And, I think that's one of the things I've seen this pattern with a lot of women is they go from not giving any kind of slap to giving the ultimate slap right away. It's like we've been arguing and fighting and bickering for 20 years, and now I'm going to file paperwork for divorce. It's like,
It's
whoa.
total shocker for the guys. Like,
Yeah, and he has no clue. Like, start with a slower slap if you can. If you're not in a physically dangerous situation, something like that, start with a slap that's lower of you need to move out. We need a separation. We need, start with some of those so that he has an opportunity to start doing the right things.
yeah, leverage,
Escalate. So,
yeah. Awesome. Cool. Well, this has been super interesting. I appreciate your time. I hope this is helpful for some people. I'm I may seem weird. I'm super proud of you for like figuring this out and moving forward, and I hope it inspires some people to do it. I think people use the term narcissist to kind of slap the label on someone. It means, well, I don't have to do anything because you're broken. It's like, and I think there's a danger in that of being so loose with that term that you think you don't have any responsibility anymore because, well, he's a narcissist. You can't fix that, like I'm good. Like, there's balance, there's definitely balance. So anyways,
yeah,
I
true.
appreciate you. I'll end the recording on my end now. Like, okay, there we go.